Good evening and good afternoon. This is Larry Rodarte, host of Mi Gente on Air, and I have a special show for you today. Typically, we are in the live stream on Tuesdays at 7 p.m., but we are here today, 2:30 p.m. on Thursday, and this show will broadcast on Saturday and Sunday this weekend. So we're real excited. Come on into the room if you would, and if you got any questions or concerns, my show today is going to be on art, particularly an exhibit that's happening at the Marshall M. Frederick Sculptures Museum at Saginaw Valley State University. They've got a great show coming with the artist named Peter Bernal, and he is a Houston native that is now living in Detroit and doing some great work throughout the Midwest. So please come on into the show. And thank you, everybody, for supporting me, Gente on Air, here at WSGW at the Alpha Media Studios, and I'm so glad to be with you here today. So come on in as we produce and bring you broadcasting Mi Gente on Air.
Welcome to Mi Gente on Air on 100.5 and 790 News Radio WSGW and online WSGW.com. Now, here is your host, Larry Rodarte.
Hello, hello. Welcome back. Welcome back to Mi Gente on Air. I'm so glad to be with you here today. And I want to invite everybody to come on into the social media platforms to be able to watch the live stream of this show. Today, we're going to be talking art, and we have a special exhibit that's coming to the Marshall M. Frederick Sculpture Museum at Michigan State University. The show is opening Saturday, March 8th, and it is going to be featuring a Latino artist. His name is Peter Bernal, and he is a Houston native that is living in Detroit and doing some great work in the Midwest community, in the Southwest community as well of Detroit. I've seen his murals when I drive down to Southwest for my at least weekly dinner over there, and it's nice to be able to see that artwork that he is
Testing.
producing. So please come into the room, everybody, and we're going to talk with artist Peter Bernal, who is going to be featured, like I said, at the Marshall M. Frederick Sculptures Museum this Saturday, March the 8th, in Saginaw Valley State University. So please welcome to the show, Peter Bernal. Peter, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. We had a little technical difficulty there, but I'm glad to see you made it here and you've arrived here at Mi Gente on Air. So thank you for being with me. They sent out a press release just yesterday in regards to the show, and I was real happy to see that we're going to be involved and have a show there at the Marshall M. Frederick Sculptures Museum. We don't get too many Latino artists that have their shows there, and so I was real excited because I was familiar with your work. I remember when you assisted my good friend Elton over there at the Dream Picker, beautiful mural that's in Southwest Detroit. And so, I was familiar with you a little bit. I did a little bit of research, and I'm glad to have you on my show today. So thank you for coming at such a fast last minute. But tell me a little bit about you and who you are. You're a native of Houston, Texas, and you went to, I believe, the art school there in Kansas City. Tell me a little bit about you and who you are.
Well, my name is Peter Bernal. I'm proud to be on your show, by the way, because I also I feel underrepresented. I think our people are just generally underrepresented in Michigan. So I feel honored to be able to speak with you on the subject. About myself, though, I come from a very long line of Tejanos. I'm named after my grandfather, Pedro, but I go by Pete as sort of a short form. Um, I fell into the arts, I guess you could say, when I was younger. I believed it was sort of like just a calling. I had some really good teachers as a student, and I was always sort of, and I think a lot of our Chicano listeners and our Tejano listeners might understand, I always found it very difficult to fit in school. And to me, I used art as sort of that way to sort of to assert that I'm there. Anyways, Yeah, so I went to school in Kansas City. I feel very proud about my education, and not only do I embrace my sort of mestizaje, is what I would call it. Because I think art is part of the answer. There's a lot of tradition. I take a lot of cues from my artistic ancestors, and I would include a lot of Mexican surrealists in that list. The classics, of course. You would say Diego, Frida, but then I also like a lot of the women in the circle who didn't get as much attention. Like Remedios Faro is one of my favorite artists, for
Mm,
example.
yes, yes, and it's really something. As you said, sometimes we don't, as Latinos, Tejanos, Chicanos, sometimes we don't always get that attention that I think that we do deserve, like you kind of mentioned, and sometimes we fall through the cracks or what have you. But isn't it something that here we are at a very volatile time in our country when right now it's not been very, very favorable to Latinos because of the new administration and all. How does that affect you as an artist and your work?
Well, it gives me a lot of fire. It gives me a lot of reason to sort of take that extra push and
Yeah,
assert to be heard because I think our identity is grossly underrepresented. And I would say I can only, yes, there's a lot of great artists now that are working, but in the grand artistic art history canon in the United States, it's few and far between. We're passed over a lot. And a lot of that is blatant racism. And a lot of it, I think it's our time to be heard, especially now. In
yeah.
that, um, yeah. So to answer your question, it gives me a lot of fire to paint, and I use it as sort of a weapon in the grand tradition of the arts.
Wow, wow. And I asked that because I know how it has affected me as a publisher of Mi Gente magazine. And I finished a piece, an editorial just yesterday called "Hate and Grief," and it talked about how what our Governor Whitmer just recently said in her address about that there's so much hate, fueled kind of by social media these days, but she feels that we have much more in common than we do in terms of differences. But it led me to write a piece in regard to the times. And I think that some of the best work journalistically comes from times like this, that, there, like you said, it fuels the fire and it just really, makes us have that voice. And so I'm very thankful to WSGW for giving me this platform to have a voice at this table so that I can talk with artists like yourselves and bring out your stories so that we're not always falling through the cracks. So thank you again for being with the show. And I want to mention again, how did they contact you in regard to the Marshall M. Frederick Sculptures Museum? I want to bring that name out so that people know that yes, you're having an art show that's going to be starting this Saturday, March 8th.
Well, I got an email from the Marshall Fredericks gang. They were really friendly, and they offered a possibility. It wasn't just me, but it was five other artists that applied to make a mural honoring Marshall Fredericks, his Spirit of Detroit sculpture, and I did the best proposal I could muster to honor his work. Um, and so that sort of happened at a really strange time in which the GM building and the area that the mural is planned is sort of right now it's in flux, and so we're and sort of bide my time. I got very lucky, and I was able to bargain an exhibition out of this to at least hold me over until I can do the mural. I'm very excited for this mural. I hope. I mean, I believe in what I do, so I'm really proud to say I'm proud to have this opportunity.
Wow. So the mural itself is going to be at the Marshall Fredericks Museum when
No,
it's
it's
completed.
sorry, it's going to be in downtown, right outside the
The Spirit
riverfront.
of Detroit.
Yeah, it's
By
going
the
to be right.
Spirit of Detroit. Okay, yeah, I wanted to make sure I clarified that. That kudos to you, man, that you were able to, muster this exhibit by, submitting, a proposal or what have you, because that's awesome that there were other artists that were involved and you kind of came up the winner of it, to be able to have this show. So that's really nice to know. Now I know that the show is titled "Searching and Finding Hidden Heritage." Tell us a little bit about that and why that theme.
Oh, this is a topic that is very close to my heart, which is why I make art about it. Ever since I was a little kid, me and my family, we were always considering ourselves Mexican because it's a long Texas tradition. We're Mexican. We weren't Hispanic or Latino. That didn't come on until later. So
Yeah.
we call ourselves Mexican. Next thing you know, we have friends from Mexico that come in, immigrants who didn't have the same American experience, who would see me and say, "You're not Mexican, you're American." I'm like, but then the Americans would say, "You're not American, you're Mexican." And so it's like this long history of not fitting in. I think the Salida movie called it the hyphen between Mexican and American.
Yeah.
And that always made me feel a little bit less. It made me feel like Mexican light or not American enough. And then I did some homework and research, and I'd be like, just wait a minute. We're mestizo. That means that we're half Native American and half, in many cases, Spanish.
Yes.
And so I feel that the Native American blood in our blood entitles us to this land. We're not immigrants in the same way that somebody that comes from Peru, God bless them, but we're also, this land is really, really ours. We don't have to fight legally for it because it really is already ours. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of government and sort of obstacles and red tape in order to get some. I mean, I at the same time, it's a difficult subject because I do not want to step on the toes of our Native American friends who were one and the same. It's just that the colonizers different. Instead of being English or French, our colonizer was Spanish, and so
Yeah.
I really lean hard into that.
Well, when I look at the artwork that you have done, there seems to be an affinity there for the native and the indigenous cultures. And I understand you have new work that's going to be featured in this show here at Marshall M. Fredericks Sculpture Museum. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. And
And tell us a little bit about that work, because if my producer could show some of that work on this is definitely more of a mestizo native art piece. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
this is the title of this painting is called "A Young Man Discovering Two Puma Cubs," which is almost a direct metaphor for my experience of finding my own roots,
Hmm.
as far as like indigenousness is concerned. A lot of Mexicans will claim heritage in Mayan or Aztec. I could not find those same roots, but in my case, my heritage happens to be Coatlicon, which is South Texas, and
Okay.
so I'm trying to use my art as a means of discovery for that. And that's the painting that you're seeing now is almost a deliberate finding your own. And I picked a puma because they're American and American only. I love cats. So let me put it that way.
Wow, very nice. And then you got the buildings in the background there too, kind of indicative of your United States experience.
That's right.
Wow, very nice, very nice. Can we show the second piece of art and tell us a little bit about this one? Because this one, it kind of threw me off. It's not indigenous, but then maybe it is. So I want you to explain this one.
Okay. Well, about the Coatlicon, a lot of the records were erased or destroyed or just lost in time. So I borrow a lot of my imagery from our Aztec culture. And so this image here is called "It Happened." There's not any really hard record. I mean, I'm not a scholar or historian, but I'm an artist. So the research that I've done, I've come to the conclusion that this must have happened, and it must have happened a lot. In which, uh, when the Spanish came and fought the Aztec and killed a lot of the men, uh, committed sexual violence against a lot of the women, it must have happened where they must have a lot of children and women must have been pulled back to Spain with them. And if I know my history, a lot of our native ancestors would not have been okay with that and would have rather seen death than to become a slave. Although the slavery did happen as well. I'm just trying to discover it and find these sort of truths that it's hard to explain, but that's why I'm a painter and not really a writer.
Well, it's really something because I think that so many of us, we do try to find our roots in who we are. And I always have said that I feel that when you know where you come from, your history, your culture, your ancestors, it makes you a much stronger person in
I
life. I feel that wholeheartedly. And like you mentioned, the Aztecs and the Mayans, and I remember my mother telling me that my grandfather would say that we were of the Aztec blood, and we probably were to an extent. But when I did the research a little bit more on his mother's family, I found out that we were Tarascan, from the state of Michoacan in near Morelia. And so, it's really something when I hear you talking in regard to this, because young people today, they typically don't understand or know where they actually are coming from. They know their ancestry may be from Mexico or some other country, but they don't understand beyond their grandparents, and definitely not the great grandparents. And so, it's I think it's real important. And I think that when I hear you talk, and you have done the research, and you have mentioned different indigenous tribes outside of the Aztecs and the Mayans, it really opens the world in a way that you know it shows that here in Michigan, whether you're in Detroit or I'm here in Saginaw, that we have those ties. We have those ties to even not, I was going to say Detroit, but we also have those ties to the Valley, in Texas,
Yes.
such as yourself. And I wanted to ask you, Peter Bernal was your grandfather. Did he have some type of musical background or anything? Because that name Bernal is very well known in the Tejano industry. As you know, in the days of Abraham Quintanilla, actually,
Yeah.
back with Selena's father, in the 60s and 70s as a producer. Is there any connection with you with that?
Unfortunately, no, not that I know of.
Oh,
I
okay.
have some musicians on my mom's side. Willie Gonzalez was my mom's uncle, to be exact. Great accordion player, and played in the like sort of the Tejano circuit back in South Texas.
Yeah, yeah. So like, yeah, I went from explaining kind of your heritage and knowing your ancestry to all of a sudden segueing into that because it was in the forefront of my mind. I didn't want to forget about it. At my age, I forget things, so I wanted to bring it out. But that's really cool that we are having this discussion on this radio station so that we can, bring those different perspectives from a different lens. And so let me kind of throw, some of the work that, you have done in regards to shows, because you are all over the place. But first of all, tell me, when did you actually move to Southwest Detroit?
We moved to Detroit in 2015. Me and my wife came.
Oh, wow. Okay. So then you were involved, I see, with the Hatch Gallery in Hamtramck. Um, you know, the Hatch program is really a nice program. I think it's Comerica Bank that puts that on. And I'm going to put my glasses on here, but No True Mexican. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
That is a euphemism that is borrowed from logic. In the rules of logic, there's an expression known as no true Scotsman. And
Mm,
no true Scotsman is a logical fallacy in which somebody who belongs to a cultural group may or may not fit in based on one thing. Like, for example, a Scotsman named Hamish is sitting at a bar and he looks over at Angus and says, Angus, Scottish people don't drink that kind of beer. And then, I guess he's not Scottish by that definition. And so Angus looks back at Hamish and says, oh, yeah, well, Scottish people don't eat that kind of porridge. And so by definition, they argued themselves out of both being Scottish. And so what I'm trying to say is what makes a Mexican is being Mexican. And it's not necessarily a nationality in this regard. It's more of a cultural name. And it's more of, for lack of a better word, it's being used in place of the word for race. But I use the word mestizo to make it more clear. So, in other words, it's kind of an answer to me growing up being told I'm not Mexican enough.
yeah, yeah.
And
I,
I, yeah,
I can definitely relate with that. And, it's funny because earlier today I was just talking about my experience here locally in the Saginaw area. and I attended Thomas White Elementary School in Bridgeport, and I had those experiences where you know. And I'm from elementary school during the late '60s, early '70s, at a whole different time and era, and so like I didn't even know what was actually happening until I became a grown, and I was able to understand what was actually happening, and not, and I'm kind of like not saying what happened. I don't want to get into that right now, but there was experiences as a Chicano, as a Mexican individual, and like you said, in those days we weren't Hispanic, we weren't Latinx, we weren't Latino. All these names that have been thrown to us, we were Mexican Americans. And I think even in those days, you were just referred to as Mexican. And so, that whole name thing that you had mentioned as well, too, earlier in the show, it can be exhausting, actually. And now I'm kind of paraphrasing what Edward James almost said in the Selena movie, in regards to you're not Mexican enough and you're not American enough. And he says it can be exhausting. And I feel that way sometimes as well, because I struggle. I struggle today even with those experiences, but I struggle today with, when people will say, well, what do you refer to yourself as? Are you Hispanic? Are you Chicano? And there's just so many, definitions of who we are. And I think that, if not us, then who is going to be the ones who define ourselves? And
Right.
so I'm glad that you are able to do this, and you consider yourself Chicano mestizo. Am I correct?
That's right. To distinguish myself from whiteness, because and to me, like it was a slur. I got slurred a lot. One of the most difficult parts of my childhood is that I was not taught Spanish. But given your sort of like testimony about your upbringing here in Michigan, I can relate to that through my parents. Neither
Hmm.
one of my parents grew up speaking English, even though we've been here for thousands of years, probably. You know, they had such a hard time before the civil rights movement. They weren't really given the same benefits as like the white kids in school. They picked cotton. My mom picked cotton, and all of my aunts picked cotton in Texas before the civil rights movement. And my grandfather was as a sharecropper, and so it was a good reason for at the time for my mom to not teach me Spanish. But it
Yeah.
also came at a very painful price, in that it cut me off from my own culture.
Wow, wow, and I surely can relate to that. We're going to go into break right now, but we're going to definitely talk about that because it affects so many of us in the state of Michigan as Mexicanos, Latinos. We sometimes get the remarks that you're Mexican and you don't speak Spanish. Well, that's what happens when sometimes you are in a country and you have to assimilate and try to be like everyone else. So we'll talk more about that when we come back from break here on Mi Gente on Air.
Excellent.
So good points, good points. And I want to encourage everybody in the Facebook chat rooms to come on in, if you will. We got a number of people in here. If you've got a comment, if you got any concerns, put it in the chat room, and we can address them, either myself or Mr. Bernal here. And it's a wonderful feeling for me today to talk with an individual who has shared some of the same experiences that I have as a Saginaw born here, and being of Mexican descent. It hasn't always been easy. I'm not saying that it's been very hard, because I know there are many individuals who've had it harder, especially my father. And we'll talk more about that when we go back into the show. But Mr. Bernal, I want to give you the opportunity here, in as we're not in the show, but we're still taping on social media platforms. Um, how do you feel about what you see as an individual in now the Detroit market in regards to Mexicans in the state of Michigan?
I feel like it's my duty to assert who I am and what I represent through our blood, because I think as much as I love Detroit and Michigan, there's a noticeable gap in the way that equality is portrayed. It's often a very black and white, literal black and white sort of world here. So I just have to remind the viewer, hey, look, I'm not from somewhere else. I might be from somewhere else in this country, but I'm also American. And I would say the same for our Muslim friends, and that there's a whole lot of work to be done to make it known that we're here, and we're not foreigners either. I wanted to assert that.
No, we surely are not. We know everything about pretty much pop culture and the American experience like any other individual that has been born here in the United States. And I'm not afraid to mention or say anything in regard to that. And this is our life experience, and so this is what we bring to the table, and that's what I think that my higher ups here at WSGW would want, is that experience of the Mexican Latino people of the Saginaw Great Lakes Bay region and throughout the state of Michigan. So that's why we're here, people. We're going to go back into the show real quick, and we're going to talk more with artist Peter Bernal. He has a show that's coming this Saturday, March 8th, at the Marshall M. Frederick Sculptures Museum. And he's got a show that is going to be talking about finding his hidden heritage. And we'll ask him again to elaborate more on that as we go back into the show here on Mi Gente on Air.
You're listening to Mi Gente on Air on WSGW.
Welcome back to Mi Gente on Air. I am your host, Larry Rodarte, and I'm talking with artist Peter Bernal, and he is a great artist that does great work. I've seen his murals in Southwest Detroit. He has a show that's coming here to the Marshall M. Frederick Sculptures Museum in Saginaw at the Saginaw Valley State University, and it's starting March 8th, and it's running through till March 28th. Both Saturdays. So come on out to the museum to experience that show. And we also have tomorrow, which is Friday, Eric Hemingway, who's going to give a companion lecture in regards to the show. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what Eric's going to be doing tomorrow?
He's going to segue into more direct Native American matters. And my goal is to sort of make connections and sort of just create this sort of unity, because they are our cousins, literally. I mean, if you go back in history.
Yeah.
And so there's also this, and I have a hard time grasping the right word for this, but I do feel we are owed a bit of justice in terms of where we want to go and live and work in our own country.
Yeah. Yeah, you said that nicely. When we talk about the experiences that we have experienced as Mexican Americans in this country, one of the big problems for some is that, as we mentioned earlier in the show, is that we don't speak Spanish, many of us, because and I'll give my example. My parents, came through in the 40s and the 50s in Saginaw, and there was a lot of racism, of course, and a lot of being held back as Mexican Americans in this country. And one of the things that was very profound for me growing up was when my mom would talk about how when she was in the Saginaw public schools, when they asked her, well, are you from Mexico? And she'd say, no, I'm from Spain, which was a lie, because her ancestry did come from Mexico, but she was born right here in Saginaw, Michigan. But it was those types of things that I realized, that they were really, they tried to hide their culture and identity and heritage. And she always said that she never liked her name. It was Anita. And she didn't like her name because, she felt that people held it against her. Maybe it made her too ethnic or whatever. My father's name was Valeriano, and those names were very more Spanish.
Beautiful name.
So, yeah, beautiful Spanish names. Now we look at that, but in those days it was very difficult. So when they did unite, they did have their children. They gave them very American names. That's why my name is Larry Rodarte, and my sisters, very American names, Nancy, Joanne, so that it took away our identity in a way as we tried to assimilate and be like everyone else in this country, because in some people's eyes, that is really what makes America great. But in my eyes, I say, well, I'm all for diversity because it makes, us a much more influential and more experienced country if we have all these different immigrants or different experiences to fall back on. So, it's really, I'm sure that you can relate coming from the Texan area and then migrating here with your wife to Michigan. But tell me a little bit about that and been your experience?
Well, I totally share your experience in a lot of ways. I mean, I think a lot of assimilation in America to me comes at this very high cost of emotional pain, or what ethnographers might call generational trauma, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, my parents kind of encouraged my art because it kind of was like a ticket to something better. Because my mom was a cotton picker and my dad was a packer. And they had a very difficult growth in the all the way up to the 2000s, up from the 60s. So when it came to that, it's like, yeah, so my name is Pete. My grandfather's name is Pedro, but there's still Spanish names, and I kind of question what my name would have been if I were still never colonized. But that's besides the point. I think to your question. We ended up moving to Michigan because there was this opportunity for me to function as an artist without the incredibly high overhead that a lot of other cities have. So that's one of the great things about Michigan, is that it's possible to work here as an artist. My wife is a conservator at the DIA, at the Detroit Institute of Arts.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
Spectacular. She's really gifted, and she's of German heritage, which I think is kind of makes a little bit of sense because there's a lot of Tejano in Tejano culture. There's already a lot of German influence with the music, for example, or at least in
Yeah.
South. It just happened that way. But yeah. So she also is very much into the arts, and through her, I grew a lot by working. I worked in Germany for a time, and I brought a lot of uh, my artistic sort of ambition with me. And in Germany, I was encouraged to be more free than I was, because growing up as an artist, I felt a little bit of shame, a little bit embarrassed because my parents worked so hard. But then here I am, a painter. It's like it's not the most lucrative profession if you're just a working artist. I mean, I'm doing okay. I'm working very hard, but I really wanted to make sure that my parents' sort of investment in me was worth something, and I really commit to being an artist, because to me I enjoy it. I love it. Everything from the colors to speaking to you about interesting things that I paint about.
Well, I hear your story. I hear um, a little bit of the pain, and I guess I recognize it very wholeheartedly because I experienced that myself. Even though I feel that I'm very privileged in this country, and I often always say, the work that my father, my grandfather, all those that came before me, and why they came from Mexico and immigrated to the United States, it has produced me to have this American dream.
Yeah.
I am the American dream, in your story, what you're saying there about how, even though there's a little bit of hurt in all of us and in your story as well, I see that you have had that experience as well of the American dream because of what your father and your mother had gone through, and they produce you, and you are experiencing that American dream by being able to express yourself through your art. I mean, it's a beautiful story. It really is. And so, I applaud you in your effort because, here I am from Saginaw. I drive down to Southwest Detroit and I see your murals on the highway there in Southwest. What do you call that? The viaduct there,
Right.
with the indigenous Indian on the canoe, and some of the others. There was quite a few at that time when it came up when you did those. And how long ago was that, by the way?
That was 2017 and 2018. they kind of overlap a little bit.
Well, I was watching every time I would go down to Detroit. I would keep looking to see, if I catch the artist who's doing that, because I was thinking at first it was my friend Elton, but I said, no, that's not Elton's work. You can recognize an artist's work if you get to know them a little bit. And so I tried to catch you down there. I never was able to, but each time I went down there, there was more, completed work each time. So, it's a beautiful rendition of the expression that you have had from your experience in trying to, um, find the heritage and culture that you are, expressing. But I wanted to ask you something because I read in the Review magazine here in Saginaw, good friend Bob Martin there, he did an interview with you in his publishing. And he says, in the interview, you said, I paint things about topics that are hard for people to visualize, such as mental illness or prejudice, using narrative to connect with viewers. I work in a heavily imaginative and intuitive manner that I consider a form of secular votive painting with the goal of lessening the pain of hate and prejudice. So, what you're saying there is kind of like what we're talking about here, the theme of this whole interview we're talking about. Can you express a little bit more about what you're saying there?
Yeah. Well, when I was growing up as an artist, one of the first people who gave me a lot of encouragement was the priest at my Catholic church, St. Matthew's in Houston. And he was of Dutch heritage, and he introduced me to everything about Vincent van Gogh. He was from the small village of Zundert. And so that gave me sort of this mission. Like I said, it was almost like a very Catholic ambition. I had to do it. It was something that if somebody has an ability to do something, it was your duty and your obligation as a human being to pursue it fully. So I did that. To also mention too, mental health has kind of always been a little bit in the background of the way that I make art, because of the way that, growing up, after a while, you start feeling like you're in somebody else's space all the time. Like if, being Tejano, I didn't know that my blood literally belonged to the land. And so when I'm in school, I might as well have been from Mars, And so this is like an assertion to say, no, this is my space. This is our space. And it's kind of a way to kind of heal that sort of anguish, that mental health related problem. And art is also prescribed from in therapy and stuff like that as a healthy way of getting out of your head, and then sharing it with people who have similar experiences, not just myself.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, your art can really help in these times that we are living in, because as somebody who has never experienced what we've experienced in this last 5-6 weeks under the new Trump administration, it's been difficult for a lot of people. And so there's a lot of angst and anxiety. And I think that it has, uh, like I mentioned in regard to the piece that I wrote about hate and grief, we are all kind of grieving in a way, because we're reaching, and thinking about the way things may have been for us before. And in some cases good, some bad. But overall, I think as a country, we are grieving in the fact that we're not looked upon as from other countries, especially from Canada and Mexico now, and how we're fighting with these countries, as well as looking at the Ukrainian war in a whole different light. And so I really think that in the entertainment, in the art world, such as what you're doing, it can really help in that whole mental health issue, because anxiety and angst, that's part of your mental health.
Yes.
And part of what I wrote in the story was, make sure you're taking care of yourself in these times, because there's so much social media interaction and all that we never used to have in the past. And I long for the days of the 80s and the 90s, when we didn't have cellular phones, or smartphones, I should say, that kept us, where we were all pointing fingers and there was so much hatred that was being produced. And so, like, honestly, if you are struggling with that, as I'm talking about this, go see a Broadway show, go see, a concert, go see uh Peter Bernard's art exhibit over at the Marshall M. Fredericks Sculptures Museum at MSU, because I mean at SVSU, because we have the privilege of having this artist in our community here in the Great Lakes Bay region. And so I don't know if that's something that you can relate with what I'm talking about. It's just something that I feel at this time. So, thank you for the artwork that you do bring to the table and that you're going to be having at the show that's starting this Saturday, March 8th, and running through March 28th in the Marshall Fredericks Museum. So, thank you for that. And what can you tell us a little bit more in regard to the show itself and the paintings?
Well, I hope that I can share with the viewer the enthusiasm that I have for the classic things about painting, like color, composition, the stories that I tell. But I also really wanted to share with the viewer my heart on the wall. I'm not so different. I want to belong to my own culture. I want other Chicanos and Tejanos and Mestizos, somebody from Argentina or Peru. I want them to understand what it means to be in America as a person with indigenous blood, or in this case, Latino blood, however you want to describe it, that this land belongs to us. This is our art space. We should be able to make any kind of art that we want, because the art is supposed to be it's supposed to be the free speech zone, where it's supposed to be. To me, it literally has become a weapon, because right now I feel so hopeless and helpless about making change through the classic diplomatic ways, like writing my senator, congressperson.
Yeah.
Like right now it's not working, so all I can do is make art, and my art is kind of angry, and I say that with pride.
Yeah. Well, there are times in history where it is much needed, um, and as we change as a country, because no matter whether it's good or bad, we are changing. We are in the midst of a change of how we're looked upon, how we look at each other, how we look at our leaders in the world. I don't remember any time, where, when I look at some of the NATO meetings where leaders, presidents, prime ministers, are all up in arms in regards to the decisions made by our leadership here in America. And we have always been friends with Canada and in Mexico, and, they are at our borders, and things are just totally different now. And so, it's important that we do have that expression from individuals and artists like yourselves, Peter, because it's badly needed. It's badly needed, I hope that you can cultivate that. I guess you would say anger, or even um, trying to find yourself. And by this interview today, I understand a little bit more about the hidden heritage that you're trying to find and searching for. That is the theme of the exhibit that's happening at the Marshall Fredericks Museum, Sculpture Museum. It's such a long name there that I always sometimes don't get it right. But, it's wonderful to see that they're bringing the diversity to the museum, and they've always been very supportive of that. And so, to have Marshall M. Fredericks, the actual sculpture artist who has such beautiful work, especially like with the Spirit of Detroit, in Detroit where you live. It's wonderful to see that in his legacy that they are providing diversity, and they're providing artists like you to come to our area and to be seen. So I hope that everybody out there, my listening audience, whether you are of Latino descent or Mexican descent, or the general public, that you will come to see this show. They call it a show, right? An art show, not an exhibit.
Whatever you like, a
Yeah.
show's
Yeah, and I say that because I'm part of the Castle Museum in Saginaw. I'm on the board, and so we're always talking about exhibits, and so that's where my mind kind of flows with it. But I understand it's an art show, and it's wonderful that, like I said, that they're bringing you to the area. Is there any last thoughts that you may have, as we go into these shows and just the time seems to just fly by? So we're 4 minutes left, and I just want to ask you if there's any other idea or thoughts that you want to bring to the table, or what you want your viewers that may attend the art show to come away with?
Well, I'm committed as an artist, and I want to sort of follow the generations long tradition of art that fights against tyranny. You see, like in art history, you got, of course, Diego made his speak. He spoke with his art and his politics. Picasso, a lot of German artists spoke against the Nazis, and I can't believe that we're in the same scenario, that we're going to have to. Our art has to be serious. I want to be taken seriously, and I hope the viewer can see it within that context.
Wow, nicely said, nicely said. And yes, so many will, they don't like that comparison. But that's where we are. And I remember attending the Holocaust Museum in Berlin, actually, and I've said this on my show before, where I remember walking in the front door, and the first thing it said is, in a big plaque, and it was in English. It wasn't in German language, but it was in English, and it said, "If it happened, it can happen again."
Yes.
And I was just really thrown by that. I mean, and how powerful of a statement that was for any individual to be walking in, to a museum and see that. And so it's the times we're living in, brother. It's the times we're living in. And I a year ago probably wouldn't have thought that we would be in the situation that we are today, because it has been drastically changed, and we are living in different times from a year ago. And so it's tough. It's tough to our Latino brothers and sisters in Michigan. So to the greater audience, I hope that you understand where we're coming from in regards to our discussion today on this show, Mi Gente on Air, where we talk about Latino culture and contributions and concerns. And this is definitely a concern that we are living in this time where Latinos, whether you are undocumented or you are an American citizen, sometimes in some of the hate that we are receiving, it doesn't matter. They look at us the same. And so, I'm saying this, and this isn't what the show was supposed to be about, actually. But like I said, we're sharing the experience of our, experiences as Mexican Americans here in the state of Michigan. So, everybody, I hope you will go out to see the show. Artist Peter Bernal is going to be in the Great Lakes Bay region, and his show, the art show that he's having over at the Marshall M. Frederick Sculptures Museum, is Finding Hidden Heritage. That's a theme. And we just want to encourage everybody to come out to this show that's going to be happening from March 8th to March 28th, 20 days, where you can experience the great work of Mr. Peter Bernal. So thank you, Peter, for being on the show. It went too fast, and love to talk more with you. And I'm glad that I was able to, I couldn't track you down whenever I would go down and see your work on the viaducts in traveling, but I was able to meet you on the show here today. And let's keep in touch. And
that sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. And that's it, everybody, for the show today, this week. And we'll see you next week here on Mi Gente on Air. And as we go into the social media platforms here, I just want Peter, if you could let people know, like, is there a website? Is there some way that outside of the art show or whatever, if somebody really wants to get in touch with you or want to have a discussion with you, is there any information you can provide for that?
Well, there's my website, peterdanielbernal.com, and you can find me there. And also my email handle is tealgreenred@gmail.com. Those are my favorite colors. I don't know why.
Yeah, my producer was having a hard time with that earlier. Matthew, tell me why you were having a hard time with getting him that email.
Yeah, listen, I was looking for the name, and I didn't know what to expect. There was like 3 different emails that on the email that you sent to me, and I was looking. I was like, man, I don't think that his email's on here. And I sent you that text message, and sure enough, it was
teal green. And you're wearing a teal green shirt, pretty much. Yeah. So nicely done. All right, man. Thanks so much, and let's keep in touch, man. And say hi to Elton if you ever see him. He's been on my show as well. And Freddie Diaz, great muralist out there as well in Detroit, man. Detroit is the place, man. They got some great artwork out there, and I love going down there. It's like going to an art show in itself when you ever, and the benefit of it is that you've got even, great culinary restaurants that you can eat at. So
Yeah, man. I wish I could paint a grito, man. If I could, I'd do that.
yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, man. Thank you so much, and thanks for coming to the show today at the last minute. We'll see you at the art show.
All right. See you later. Bye bye.
All right. Take care.